They didn't push me because they hated me. They pushed me because I'd stopped mattering. It began with a laugh. Not the kind that fills a house with warmth, but the kind that cuts through the ribs, light, careless, and laced with something sharp. Michael had just shoved me off the swing, and as I hit the damp spring grass, his laughter peeled out into the garden like it was the best thing he'd seen all week. David joined in a moment later, softer, unsure, but still there. I groaned as I rolled onto my side, my hip aching from the fall. Above me, the swing creaked gently in the breeze, still swaying without me. Michael stood with his arms crossed, triumphant. Claire's voice drifted from the patio, casual and wine-slick, "Boys, be nice." No one moved. No one helped me up. They'd come for the weekend, dropped off like luggage while Peter and Claire went to some fundraiser in Napa. I'd looked forward to it, in that naive way habit tricks you into hope. The last time they visited, Michael was quieter. David still sat on my lap and asked questions. But something had shifted since then. That night, I mentioned the fall over dinner, my tone light but careful. Claire barely looked up from her plate. "Oh, Harold," she said, smiling like I'd told a joke. "You're tougher than that." Peter didn't say anything. Just reached for the salt. The next few weeks passed in a strange rhythm. The boys returned every Saturday like clockwork. Sometimes for a night. Sometimes longer. Peter always had a reason, work, events, needing a break. I told myself I didn't mind. I'd done it when they were small. Changed their diapers. Walked them to preschool. But this was different. The air felt colder when they arrived. They never asked about my week. Never looked up from their screens. They were present, but not with me. 2 weekends after the swing, we walked out past the old stone wall behind the garden. I pointed out fox tracks in the dirt, trying to make it a moment. Michael was beside me, silent. David behind us, hands in his hoodie. Then I felt it, a shove, sudden and hard, right between the shoulders. I stumbled forward, my hand slamming into the jagged edge of the stone. Skin split open instantly, pain blooming up my arm. I turned quickly. Michael was already walking ahead. David stared, then muttered a single phrase. "Do it again." He didn't laugh this time. But he didn't look sorry either. When we got back to the house, I rinsed the blood from my palm in silence. The bathroom mirror showed a face I hardly recognized, pale, drained, jaw tight. Over dinner, no one asked about the bandage. That night, I sat in my study, the only room that still felt mine, and opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years. Swing. Stone wall. Same laughs. Same silence. No questions. No care. And still they return, week after week, as if this house is theirs by inheritance. I've become something between furniture and target practice. But I see them. And I remember everything. A week later, they came again. Claire said she had a yoga retreat. Peter didn't even come to the door. The boys dropped their bags in the living room like they owned it. I offered grilled cheese. They asked for money for takeout. It was Sunday afternoon when I made the mistake of inviting them to the attic. I thought, foolishly, they might find something worth remembering. I'd kept boxes of their father's toys. Baby photos. Baseball gloves. A telescope David once begged me for. The attic ladder groaned under my weight as I climbed, knees protesting with every step. They followed behind, whispering. Then came the crack. An old wasp nest I'd meant to remove last fall had been struck with something, a broom handle, maybe. It shattered against the attic beam. Dust and brittle fragments fell like ash. 3 wasps, still alive, sluggish with cold, shot toward me. I flinched. My foot slipped. My shoulder slammed into the wood as I clung to the ladder. Below me, laughter. Michael barked first. You should have seen your face. David laughed too. Nervously, but without hesitation. I descended slowly, each rung a test of what was left of my pride. When I reached the floor, I looked at both of them. Michael was already walking away. David paused, just for a second, then followed. That night, over dinner, Claire asked if I'd cleaned the attic. I nodded once. She didn't ask why I was limping. Peter told Michael to be nicer to Grandpa. Michael smirked. We're just having fun. I didn't respond. I didn't touch my food. I just listened. To the clatter of forks. To the sound of silence when I stopped speaking. To the distant echo of something breaking, not in the attic, but in me. Later, I wrote. They've turned cruelty into sport. Peter enables it. Claire laughs at it. Michael leads. David follows. I don't matter anymore, not as a father, not as a grandfather, not even as a man. But I have something they don't. I remember. I endure. And I still know how to make plans. I closed the notebook and set it in the drawer beside the bed. Outside, the wind knocked softly at the window. Somewhere in the house, the swing creaked, empty again. And I thought. If they think this is a game, they're about to find out I've played longer than any of them. That evening, I sat across from them at the table I'd built with my own hands 37 years ago. Back when Peter was small and Claire still looked at me with something like admiration. The oak had scratches now, each one with its own memory, but none of that mattered to the people sitting around it. Michael lounged with one foot hooked over the opposite knee, arms draped over the chair like he owned the room. David, always mimicking, sat the same way. They were talking about some soccer match I didn't know, trading stats and trash talk, their voices loud, careless. Claire passed the breadbasket with her usual half-smile and her eyes on her phone. Peter was already 2 glasses into his wine. No one noticed my hand. The bruised one. The fingers still swollen from where I caught myself on the ladder 2 days ago. It sat there on the table like a quiet accusation, veins raised against pale skin, knuckles puffy, useless. I didn't wear the bandage. Thought it might get a comment. A question. It didn't. I scored twice last week, Michael said between bites. Coach says I'm basically guaranteed varsity next year. Coach also says you run your mouth too much, David chimed in. They both laughed. Claire laughed too, not because it was funny, but because it gave her something to do. I cleared my throat. They didn't hear me. So I tried again. I remember when Peter used to run sprints on the high school track. Wore his cleats inside once, just to break them in. Left a trail of mud down the hall. Silence. Then Michael rolled his eyes. Cool story, Grandpa. David twisted his face into a slow, dragging version of my voice. Back in my day. More laughter. Even Claire smirked. I felt it like a punch to the chest, the kind that doesn't break bone, just steals your breath for a second too long. Peter looked up, finally. But not at me. At Michael. Don't talk to your grandfather like that, he said, more out of obligation than conviction. Michael shrugged. He started it. Started what? A memory? A sentence? I looked at the roast on my plate. I'd spent the afternoon seasoning it, letting it rest, setting the table with real napkins. No one had noticed. No one had thanked me. It was just there, expected, consumed, discarded. The candle flickered between us. A small thing trying to stay alive in a room that didn't need its light. I used to come home from meat starving, Peter said suddenly. His voice was soft, uncertain, a thread reaching toward something. Claire interrupted before it could go anywhere. Michael, did you finish your essay? Don't forget, it's due Monday. Gone. Just like that. The moment passed. Peter sank back into his chair, and I wondered if he even realized he'd tried. I picked up my glass, water, no wine anymore since the heart attack, and sipped. It tasted metallic. Off. Or maybe that was just my mood. So, David, I tried again. How's that science project coming? Still building that volcano? He blinked. That was, 2 years ago. Claire didn't correct him. Didn't remind him that I'd driven him to the craft store for materials. Paid for the foam board. Helped him cut the base. I see, I said quietly. More laughter erupted from the boys as they passed a phone back and forth. Some video. Some meme I wouldn't understand. They laughed like I wasn't there. Peter poured himself another glass of wine. The fork in my hand felt heavy, pointless. I set it down and looked at my plate again. It wasn't just food anymore, it was the last offering of a man who didn't know what else to give. They devoured it without seeing the hands that made it. I think I'll head to bed, I said, standing slowly. No protests. No, are you okay? No, thanks for dinner. Just a grunt from Michael. A nod from Claire. Peter didn't even look up. I left the table behind, my steps slow, each one echoing on the hardwood like a metronome counting down something. I passed the photos on the hallway wall, Peter in his graduation gown, Linda smiling beside him, the boys as toddlers in a plastic pool, and felt them turn into artifacts. Things belonging to someone who didn't live here anymore. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Not thinking. Just, existing. The house hummed with their voices in the distance, soft now, full of jokes and plans and things I wasn't part of. I opened my notebook. I sat at the table tonight, but I wasn't in the room. My voice doesn't carry anymore. My stories don't matter. I tried to remind them of something, warmth, family, history, but all I reminded them of was how easy it is to forget someone who stays quiet. I closed the book and placed it gently in the drawer. Outside, a bird called once. Then silence. I remembered a moment, long ago, when Linda and I sat at this very table with Peter. He was 12, like Michael is now. He cried over a failed test. Linda rubbed his back. I made him laugh with a joke about algebra and aliens. He smiled. He felt safe. I thought about that version of Peter, the boy I raised, and wondered where he'd gone. Or maybe I was the one who disappeared first. Back in bed, I turned out the light. The voices from the kitchen faded. The candle had been blown out. And I thought. Maybe I really am invisible now. But even a ghost remembers what it was like to be real. In the bathroom mirror, I didn't just see a reflection. I saw the final version of a man they'd already started erasing. The morning light spilled in through the frosted glass, soft but merciless. It painted every wrinkle with precision. Each line in my face was a ledger of years spent serving, family, duty, sacrifice. There was a time I wore those marks with quiet pride. But now? Now I just looked tired. I leaned in, the breath from my nose fogging the glass. My bruised hand trembled as I ran it through what little hair I had left. I whispered, not even meaning to, is this who I am to them now? A ghost? I waited for the silence to answer. It didn't. Behind me, the sound of footsteps thudded down the hallway. One of the boys. Maybe both. They didn't knock. Didn't ask if I was in there. Just passed by, talking about a video game, laughing. Always laughing. As if the walls didn't contain anything older than them. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I wasn't in that mirror. I was on the porch again, 10 years ago, holding a toddler in each arm. Michael had given me a wildflower, crushed in his fist, petals bent, and said, "This one's for you, Grandpa." David, not to be outdone, thrust a dandelion into my pocket and climbed onto my lap without asking. They had argued, giggled, called me their favorite. That memory stung more than any insult they'd thrown since. Because it was real. Because they meant it. Now I was a prop at the table. A slow voice to mock. A body to shove. I left the mirror behind and went to the study, the only room they didn't touch. It still smelled like cedar and paper, old books and lemon oil. Safe smells. Linda used to sit on the armrest of my chair, her hand in my hair, laughing at my terrible handwriting when I tried to journal. I opened the drawer and pulled out the notebook. My fingers ached as I gripped the pen, but I wrote anyway. They don't see me. Not really. Just a placeholder for who I used to be. I remind them of age. Of slowing down. Of things they don't want to think about. But I also remember. I remember everything. And I won't let that vanish just because they pretend it never mattered. I stared at the words. I didn't cry. That part of me had dried up years ago, at Linda's funeral. But I felt something stir. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not rage. Not grief. Resolve. Later, I walked through the house while they were all out. Claire had taken the boys to a movie. Peter stayed behind, glued to his laptop as always. We didn't speak much. Just passed each other in the hall like strangers with matching blood types. In the boys' room, the smell of sweat and soda and something synthetic hung heavy in the air. I opened the window, let the breeze cut through it. My hand brushed against Michael's backpack, the same one I helped pick out last year. He'd told the salesgirl I was just the driver. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the mess. My eyes scanned the posters on the wall, athletes I didn't recognize. A shelf of expensive sneakers. Headphones. A console I couldn't name. Everything in the room screamed new, loud, fast. And I was none of those things. I walked back down to the garden. The swing still creaked when the wind hit just right. I stood in front of it, the same patch of grass where I'd landed weeks ago still faintly yellowed. I didn't sit. I just stood there, letting the air remind me that I wasn't dead yet. Peter's voice called from the kitchen window. You all right out there? It surprised me. I nodded. He didn't come out. Didn't follow up. But that moment, even just the question, felt foreign. Like a flare fired in the dark. Too small to matter. Too bright to ignore. That night, after they returned, we had leftovers for dinner. Claire didn't bother heating them properly. The boys complained, poking at cold mashed potatoes with their forks. No one mentioned the garden. No one asked where I'd been. I didn't speak. Instead, I watched. Michael was chewing with his mouth open. David mimicked a YouTuber's voice. Claire checked her phone 5 times in 10 minutes. Peter stared at the wall above my head, lost in thought. They were a family. I was the backdrop. After dinner, I stood in the hallway while they gathered around the TV. Laugh track, bright colors, the boys leaning on the couch as if nothing had ever cracked between us. And maybe, for them, nothing had. I went back to the study and opened the notebook again. Today I saw myself clearly. Not in the mirror. Not in their eyes. But in absence. My place is ornamental now, the old chair in the corner. The quiet plate at the end of the table. But the difference between silence and surrender is what you choose to do next. I closed the book slowly. Not with defeat. But with care. Then I pulled down the box from the top shelf, the one marked private. Inside, papers, letters, old photographs. Legal documents I hadn't touched since Linda passed. The weight of a life lived quietly. Carefully. I flipped through them, my fingers steady now. Not for vengeance. Not yet. Just preparation. Down the hallway, someone laughed again. But for the first time, I didn't flinch. The study was the only part of the house that still felt like it belonged to me. Not because anyone let me have it, but because everyone else forgot it existed. On the wall hung the same bookshelf Linda and I installed when Peter was in grade school. The varnish had dulled, but it still held. Every time I walked past it, I touched the side, not for balance, but memory. That shelf had carried the weight of decades. Just like me. I sat down at the old desk and looked at the stack of receipts I kept tucked in the drawer. Not bills. Not debts. Proofs. Braces for Michael, $4,200. Asthma medication for David, recurring for 6 years. Guitar lessons for Michael. Tuition deposits. Camp fees. Uniforms. Sports gear. Doctor visits Peter couldn't cover, but didn't argue when I did. Page after page, line after line, all in my careful handwriting. They weren't just expenses. They were choices. My choices. Every dollar given, every hour spent in waiting rooms, every weekend sacrificed so Peter and Claire could keep their date nights, build their careers, or just escape, I did it because I believed I was building something. I told myself I was giving them a foundation. But now I realize I was building a house where I'd never be welcome again. I stared at one page longer than the rest, a printout of David's hospital visit from when he was 8. Severe asthma attack. Claire had been at a conference, Peter unreachable. I held David's hand in the ER while he wheezed through a plastic mask. He was crying, terrified, clinging to me like a lifeline. He doesn't remember that now. But I do. I remember every second. I remember pacing the kitchen at 3 a.m. with a crying Michael, bouncing him on my shoulder when Claire couldn't keep her eyes open. I remember driving across the county line in a rainstorm to pick Peter up when his car broke down and he didn't have the courage to call anyone else. I remember selling Linda's wedding band to cover one of their overdue school fees. They don't remember. Or worse, they remember and don't care. I pulled the notebook toward me, flipping past earlier entries. The pages smelled faintly of old ink and quiet rage. I used to think that sacrifice was invisible by design. That good men give quietly and let the results speak. But the truth is, if you never remind them what you gave, they'll rewrite the story without you in it. My silence has been their permission. No more. A knock startled me. Peter stood in the doorway, tie loose, laptop under one arm. "Hey," he said. "You've been in here a while." I looked at him. For a moment, I saw the boy who used to ask me to read him pirate stories. Now. He was thinner. Grayer around the temples. But the distance in his voice had nothing to do with age. "I'm just organizing some old files," I replied. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on the open notebook. "You writing again?" "Just notes. Observations." He hesitated. "You know, Michael's been acting out lately. Claire thinks it's school pressure. Sports stuff." I said nothing. Let the silence hang. He shifted his weight. "Anyway. Just, wanted to check in." Then he turned and walked away. Not even 5 seconds. But enough to confirm it, he felt the shift too. Something in the air had changed. Maybe he thought it was age. Maybe he thought it was me slipping. But it wasn't. It was clarity. That night, I watched from the hallway as Claire and the boys played a card game in the living room. Laughter, teasing, snacks in bowls I hadn't been asked to join. Not one invitation. Not one glance my way. I turned and walked to the garage. The cabinet in the corner still held everything from my handyman years, wrenches, oil cans, tools I hadn't touched since my knees gave out. But behind it, in a faded folder, were the blueprints to the house. I'd drawn them myself in '86. Paid a contractor only to follow my specs. Every room had a story. Every floorboard, a purpose. And now, I was a stranger in every square foot. In the attic, I kept a second safe. One they didn't know about. Inside, copies of legal documents, old insurance policies, Linda's letters, and the original trust agreement for the house and my accounts. The paperwork was old but clean, sealed in plastic sleeves. As I leafed through them, one line kept ringing in my head, something Linda once said when Peter was 16 and had called her controlling during an argument. If you raise a child without boundaries, don't be surprised when they erase you to redraw the map. She was right. I'd spent years being the flexible one. The one who bailed them out, who gave second chances, who let little disrespect slide for the sake of keeping peace. But peace had turned into passivity. And passivity had rotted into contempt. Back in the study, I sat down again and reopened the notebook. They think I'm forgettable. Disposable. That what I gave was just part of the deal. But the thing about sacrifice is, it leaves records. Not just receipts. Not just scars. But echoes. And those echoes are getting louder. Every hour, every act of erasure. I write it down. I keep the ledger. I paused, tapped the pen against the desk, and added one last line. Because one day, when they come asking what happened, I'll have all the answers. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I couldn't sleep, again, and the house had that too quiet tension it always got late at night. Peter and Claire had gone out to some charity dinner, the boys stayed behind, holed up in Michael's room with the door half shut and the TV muttering faint background noise. I'd gone to the kitchen to make tea. Nothing fancy. Just something warm to settle my hands. But as I passed the hallway, I heard my name. That stopped me cold. Not Grandpa. Not Harold. Just him. And then Michael's voice, low and smooth. Dad says once he's gone, the trust fund is ours. I froze. David replied, his tone light, almost laughing, like, everything. A pause. Then a rustle of sheets, or maybe just a shrug. Yeah, Michael said. House. Money. Accounts. He says it's all technically going to Mom, but we'll get it. Sooner or later. David let out a whistle. Easy money. I took a step back, slowly, one foot behind the other like walking off a cliff. My hand gripped the doorframe, but I didn't make a sound. I just stood there, listening. Michael continued, more animated now, we could finally get out of here. Imagine, no more waiting on college loans. I told Dad we should move the process along. David laughed. You mean like, bump him off? Silence. And then the most dangerous sound of all, both of them laughing. Not the laughter of children. Not even the stupid recklessness of teenagers. It was colder. Sharper. It was cruelty with purpose. I don't remember walking back to the study. Don't remember the tea. I just remember sitting down at the desk, my chest hollow, hands clenched. The notebook waited. Tonight, I heard it clearly. The way they speak of me. Not with hate. But with hunger. I'm a number to them. A process. A delay in their plan. They are not children. They are investors, and I am their obstacle. I stared at the words for a long time. My pen hovered. They want the future, but they've erased the past. I fed them, clothed them, healed them. And now they count the hours until I vanish. My hand shook. Not from fear. Not even from sadness anymore. Just from the sheer clarity of it. This was no longer about bad behavior. It wasn't about jokes or disrespect. This wasn't boys being boys. It was succession. I opened the filing cabinet under the desk. Inside was the original copy of the living trust I'd signed years ago. I'd updated it after Linda passed, something I never told Peter about. I ran my fingers over the envelope. Still sealed. Still legal. They thought they knew the future. They didn't know what I'd kept quiet. Later that night, when Peter and Claire returned, I watched them carefully. They moved through the house with the ease of people who believed they belonged. Claire kissed the boys goodnight. Peter poured himself a nightcap. No one spoke to me. But I looked at Peter, really looked, and something clicked. He knew. Maybe not the laughter. Maybe not the timing. But he knew what Michael expected. Maybe he even promised it. His posture wasn't confident, it was resigned. Like a man who'd made a deal and didn't want to see it through. I wanted to confront him. The words sat on the edge of my tongue all evening. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed more than anger. More than accusation. I needed control. The next morning, I went to the garage. Leonard's card was still in the drawer by the old tool bench. He'd visited once since Linda died, brought over a pie, some warmth. We'd worked together in the city when we were younger. He left law. I left ambition. Now. Maybe we both had something to offer each other again. I picked up the card, turned it over in my hand. Then I slipped it into my back pocket and walked back to the house. The boys were in the kitchen, eating cereal, laughing about some video online. Michael saw me and said, "Morning, old man. You look like hell." David snorted. I smiled. Just a little. Didn't sleep much, I said. Too many dreams. Don't hurt yourself climbing those stairs again, Michael muttered. Claire, breezing in with her sunglasses on, added, "Maybe we should move you to the downstairs guest room. Just in case." So considerate. So thoughtful. They couldn't wait to put me in the ground, but they'd settle for the guest room in the meantime. I walked past them, calm, steady. In my head, I was already dialing Leonard. Already hearing his voice say, "What took you so long?" Later that afternoon, I sat in the study again, door half shut, pen in hand. They think I am finished. They think I am frail. They think silence is surrender. But silence is a weapon, if you know how to load it. I will not give them warning. Only outcome. They forget that I still hold the key. Not just to the house. Not just to the accounts. But to the story. And when it's done, they won't even recognize the version they're in. The pen scratched across the page. Not with rage. With precision. Outside, the wind rustled the old trees. Inside, I smiled. Because now, it wasn't just survival. It was strategy. It was Leonard who rang the bell. Not a call. Not a text. Just the sound of a doorbell I hadn't heard in weeks, months, maybe, followed by the slow creak of his familiar frame standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you've been hit by a bus," he said, grinning. "I feel like I've been run over twice," I replied. He handed me the coffee. No questions yet. Just heat in my hands, the kind of gesture that says, "I came because I knew you wouldn't ask." We sat on the back porch, facing the garden. The swing didn't creak that day, too still. The boys were at school. Peter and Claire had gone to a meeting. The house was quiet in a way that let you finally tell the truth. Leonard didn't press. Not right away. He let me speak when I was ready. And I did. I told him everything. Slowly. Haltingly. But thoroughly. The swing. The stone wall. The attic. The jokes. The silence. The way Peter looked through me. Claire's frozen smiles. The boys' casual cruelty, like it was all just practice for something worse. And then I told him what I heard. About the trust fund. About easy money. About being referred to as, when he's gone. Leonard didn't interrupt. didn't flinch. He just sat there, one hand on his knee, eyes narrow with something between anger and disbelief. When I finally stopped, he leaned forward, elbows on thighs. "Do you have your documents?" he asked. I nodded. "Everything. In the attic safe. Copies in the study." He looked at me like a doctor delivering news he didn't want to. "Then you don't need revenge, Harold. You need protection. Legal. Immediate. Quiet." I stared at my hands, liver-spotted, veined, tired, and said, "I waited too long." "No," he said firmly. "They just counted on you waiting forever." We talked for hours. Not just about the trust, but the little things. The way David used to cling to me at night. How Michael used to ask me to push him higher on the swing. The Christmas Claire forgot to bring gifts, and I covered for her. The hospital visits. The birthdays they stopped showing up for. "They think they're the future," I muttered. "But I'm still here." "You're not just here," Leonard said. "You still hold the pen. And it's time you wrote the ending, not them." Before he left, he reached into his coat and pulled out a business card, thick, cream-colored, with embossed lettering. Julia Hart. Elder Law and Estate Protection. "She's sharp," he said. "No bullshit. She handled my aunt's case, remember Delilah? When her niece tried to force her into signing over the condo? I did remember. And I remembered how Delilah kept her place until she died, peaceful and on her own terms. She'll help," Leonard said. "But you have to let her." For a moment, I hesitated. The old part of me, the father, the peacemaker, the fool, still whispered, maybe they don't mean it. Maybe this can still be fixed. But I thought of the laughter. I thought of my name being reduced to a transaction. And I thought of how none of them had come to ask why I ate alone last night. Why I spent so much time in the study. Why I walked slower every day. I took the card. That night, I wrote in the notebook again. Leonard came today. With coffee. With warmth. With truth. He reminded me that I'm not crazy. That what I'm feeling, the slow fading, isn't imagined. It's engineered. They've built a life that doesn't include me, but expects my resources. My silence. My death. But I'm not dead. Not yet. And now, I have a name. Julia Hart. The first step is not revenge. It's reclaiming. My life. My rights. My voice. Down the hallway, I heard the front door open, Claire and Peter returning. The smell of wine followed them. Laughter. A story about someone at the dinner making a fool of themselves. They didn't notice the card on the desk. Or the fire beginning to kindle behind my eyes. That night, in bed, I looked at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead and whispered to myself, they forget who paid for this roof. The ceiling didn't answer. But I didn't need it to. Because in the morning, I would call Julia. And for the first time in a long time, I wouldn't be alone. Julia Hart didn't look like what I expected. No gray bun, no reading glasses dangling from a chain, no forced smile to make me feel like a harmless old man. She wore black. Sharp blazer. No-nonsense heels. Her hair was tied back, sleek and precise. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and mint, and everything on her desk was aligned to invisible lines of symmetry. "Mr. Fielding," she said, standing to greet me. "Leonard said you'd be in touch." Her handshake was firm. Respectful. Not pitying. We sat across from each other, me with my folder, her with a legal pad and a voice that didn't rise or fall for effect. "I read your message," she began. "And I've handled cases like this before." I almost smiled. "That's hard to believe." "It shouldn't be," she said, and that was when I realized just how much ugliness she'd probably seen. Inheritance pressure. Familial coercion. Disrespect escalating toward financial manipulation. You're not alone. I opened the folder and handed over the documents, the original trust, bank account copies, Linda's old will, and my own notes. She read in silence. Fast. Focused. When she looked up, there was something different in her eyes. Not concern. Not surprise. Readiness. Here's what we're going to do, she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't padded. She laid it out like a general preparing for siege. First, we freeze access to the trust. You still have control, but no one else does. If your son tries anything under your name, the bank will flag it and notify me. I nodded slowly. He doesn't have permission yet. Julia gave a tight smile. Let's make sure he never does. She continued, second, we update your will. We add a no contest clause. That means if anyone tries to dispute your final wishes, they're automatically disinherited. I blinked. Even if they're family? Especially if they're family. Her pen moved quickly, precise strokes forming protection on paper. Third, she said, we assign someone you trust as your healthcare proxy and financial power of attorney. Someone other than Peter or Claire. That way, if anything happens to you, stroke, coma, hospital stay, they can't sign documents or access accounts on your behalf. I thought for a moment. Leonard. Perfect, she said. He's already vouched for you. I'll draw up the paperwork today. She leaned back slightly, assessing me like an architect surveying a rebuild. Finally, she said, you continue what you've been doing, document everything. Every interaction. Every comment. Every slight. I don't care if it feels petty, write it down. I reached into my coat and held up the notebook. Already started. Julia nodded, satisfied. Good. That's your shield. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like a patient waiting to be diagnosed. I felt like a man being armed. After our meeting, I sat in my car for a long while before turning the key. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed, deep and steady, the kind of breath you take when you realize the storm hasn't passed, but at least you found shelter. At home, no one asked where I'd been. Claire was on the phone, laughing about something she'd seen at the club. Peter was on his laptop. The boys were upstairs, shouting over a video game. I walked past all of them. Into my study. Closed the door. Then I opened the notebook. Her name is Julia Hart. She wears black and speaks like a verdict. Today, I didn't beg for help. I planned for war. This is not revenge, not yet. It's protection. Positioning. Taking back the ground they've slowly walked across while pretending they still respected the soil. I paused. Then added. They think I'm nearing the end. That I'll fade quietly like wallpaper, and they'll inherit the room. But I still own the walls. And I've just locked the door. That evening, during dinner, Claire casually said, we were thinking, maybe it's time we start talking about moving you into something smaller. Michael didn't look up from his phone. David muttered, like assisted living. Peter cleared his throat. Just a thought. I cut into my food slowly. Deliberately. Sounds like you've been having a lot of thoughts lately. Claire blinked. We just want what's best. For who? I asked. No one answered. But I saw the flicker in Peter's face, a brief hesitation, the twitch of calculation shifting. They sensed something. Maybe it was my tone. Maybe it was the way I held my fork like it wasn't just a utensil anymore. I smiled. I appreciate the concern, I said. But for now, I think I'll stay right where I am. The air stiffened. David shifted. Michael looked up. No one laughed. Later that night, I added one more note before sleep took me. They think they can speak my future into existence. That I'll step aside for their convenience. But today I met someone who reminded me, no one inherits power. You either take it, or protect it until the end. And I've only just begun. After Julia locked things down, I didn't announce it. I didn't make a speech. I didn't warn anyone. I simply started watching. The power of silence isn't just in withholding, it's in what it exposes. The first test was simple. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter. Plain white. No name. Inside was a blank sheet of paper. Nothing on it. Just enough weight to seem important. Just enough temptation to tug at curiosity. By noon, it was gone. Claire didn't mention it. But later, when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw her whisper something to Peter in the hallway, holding the envelope in her palm like it might burn a hole through her skin. He waved her off. Probably one of Dad's weird little notes. The next day, I left another. This time I wrote one line. It's not the will you think it is. It vanished within an hour. At dinner, Michael nudged David and muttered, "Did you see that creepy envelope again?" David rolled his eyes. "You mean the one with Grandpa's cryptic serial killer handwriting?" Claire laughed too hard. "Oh, stop. He's just writing again. It's harmless." I said nothing. Just chewed slowly, methodically. One bite at a time. But I watched their faces. Peter's especially. He was sweating, though the room was cool. He reached for his wine twice in 10 minutes. Julia had been right, fear didn't need declarations. Just suggestion. A few days later, I started leaving my notebook slightly open on the coffee table. Never in the same place. Never to the same page. Sometimes it was a blank page. Sometimes it was an entry with only one line. They forget I still know where the bodies are buried. Other times, I'd leave a passage in the middle of a rant, something half-formed and dangerous, like a grenade without a pin. Silence is never the absence of strategy. It's the gathering of storm. David was the first to peek. I caught him glancing over my shoulder while I sat in the study. He pretended to yawn. Then his eyes flicked to the page. He didn't laugh this time. That night, he passed me in the hall and said nothing. No jokes. No mimicking. Just, "Night." It was the first word he'd said to me without sarcasm in weeks. Michael, on the other hand, stayed confident. Cocky. But even he began to edge around me more. Less shoving. Less swagger. Fear, it seemed, didn't have to scream. It only had to whisper through paper and ink. I started taking slow walks around the property again, not for my health, but for presence. Visibility. I stopped by the fence where Michael had pushed me toward the stone wall. I touched the edge again, letting my fingers trace the groove in the stone where I'd bled. Then I knelt down, planted a small flower beside it. A mark. Let them wonder what it meant. One morning, as I returned from a walk, Mrs. Evans from next door stood at the edge of her yard, holding a basket of warm bread wrapped in cloth. She was in her 80s now, nearly blind, but still walked with straight posture and sharper awareness than most people half her age. "I thought you might like this," she said. I thanked her. As I reached for the basket, her hand lingered on mine. Then she said it, quietly, like a secret. "People notice more than you think." I met her eyes. There was no question in her face. No need for details. She knew. She always had. Back inside, I placed the bread on the table. No one thanked me. Claire asked if it was gluten-free. Peter didn't even look up. The boys were already reaching for their phones again. But I didn't care. Because not everyone had chosen cruelty. I wrote again that night, ink deep and deliberate. They see me writing and think it's madness. Or worse, irrelevance. But I've learned that when people stop watching your mouth, they forget you still have hands. That you can still write. Still plan. Still act. David looked. Michael mocked. Claire read but dismissed. And Peter, he waits. He's not sure which way the wind is blowing yet. But he knows it's changed. I paused. Closed the book. Then opened it again to one blank page. And I wrote. The house is still mine. That weekend, Peter received a letter, from the bank. I saw the envelope, crisp and official, with my attorney's insignia faintly embossed on the corner. He opened it in the kitchen and immediately walked outside with his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't return for 20 minutes. When he did, he looked like he'd aged 5 years. He didn't say a word to me. Just nodded once and went upstairs. The next morning, Claire was quiet. She didn't mention assisted living. Didn't ask about downsizing. She offered me tea, for the first time in months. But I said I preferred coffee. Even Michael toned down his usual performance. No jabs. No reenactments of my slow walk or the attic stumble. It wasn't kindness. It was calculation. And I welcomed it. Respect forced by unease was still respect. In my study that night, I lit a small candle. Linda's old holder, brass, simple. She used to light it when she needed to think. Now it was mine again. The flame flickered, steady. I opened the notebook one last time that night and wrote. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them squirm. Because for every smirk, every insult, every push or whisper or lie, I left a page open. I wrote it all. And now, the book isn't for me. It's for them. Let them read it one day, when they finally realize I was never quiet. Just patient. It was Claire's idea to host the barbecue. Just family and neighbors, she said. Nothing fancy. I knew better. Claire didn't do casual. She did curated. Polished. Carefully staged performances disguised as community. And this one was meant to show how well everything was going, how lovely their home was, how successful their boys were, and how well the aging patriarch still fit into the background like an antique lamp. I agreed, of course. Because sometimes the best way to expose a lie is to let it run its course in the open. By noon, the backyard was full. Folding chairs, paper plates, laughter drifting through the trees. Someone set up a Bluetooth speaker. The music was too loud for conversation but perfect for distraction. Neighbors brought pies. Old friends of Claire's from the club complimented her landscaping. Peter drank too fast, as usual. Michael and David tossed a football back and forth, laughing too loud, performing for their audience like trained seals. I stayed seated on the far side of the patio, in the shade. Not silent, just still. I smiled politely, nodded when addressed. But I watched. Every word. Every movement. Because I knew something they didn't. They couldn't help themselves. It started with a joke, a story Michael told to one of his friends from school. Loud enough for people to hear. Loud enough to make sure I did. So my grandpa, right? He said, holding court near the grill. He's out back, standing by this crumbling stone wall like it's the Berlin Wall or something. And I just nudge him a little, and boom, the guy practically flies sideways. Laughter. David chimed in, puffing out his chest. Dude, the sound he made, like a goose trying to fart underwater. More laughter. A roar this time. Michael mimicked me, arms flailing, legs wobbly. He stumbled dramatically into a chair, rolling to the ground with exaggerated groans. Grass on his shirt. Dirt on his face. The crowd howled. Claire laughed too. Not deeply, not cruelly, just enough to say boys will be boys without saying it. Peter didn't laugh. But he didn't stop them either. That was worse. Then came the next act. David shuffled across the patio with slow, dragging feet. Harold Shuffle, he called it, narrating like a sports announcer. Notice the cautious steps. The constant squint. Is he looking for a chair? A hearing aid? Or his will? Michael collapsed in fake exhaustion behind him. Laughter again, from kids, adults, people I'd once shared coffee with. People who knew me. Or used to. No one stopped them. Not even the ones who said, "Oh, come on," with a smile. Because smiling made it okay. Right? The final straw came when Michael grabbed my old cane, the one I kept by the garden steps, and strutted across the lawn, leaning on it, moaning, mocking the way I breathed climbing stairs. He even hunched over, clutching his back, and wheezed, "Claire, where's my pudding?" That line brought down the house. People laughed until they cried. And I sat there, still. Not humiliated. Not angry. Just, certain. Certain that there was no longer any version of this story in which I could pretend they loved me. Because love doesn't perform your pain for laughs. Love doesn't turn your body into punchlines. Love doesn't record you in secret. Yes, someone recorded it. I saw the phone come up. A neighbor's teenage son. He filmed the whole thing. I saw him laugh, too. But when our eyes met, mine steady, his behind the screen, he lowered the phone slowly. Too late. The damage was done. I stood. No one noticed at first. Not until the laughter died down. Then a few people glanced my way. David's smile faltered. Michael coughed. Claire turned away. I didn't speak. Didn't demand silence. Didn't lecture. I simply walked back into the house. The next morning, the video surfaced online. A local page. Just titled, "Old Man Olympics." I watched it once. Just once. Then I wrote. They turned my body into a stage. My age into their entertainment. They didn't even need cruelty, just comfort with the idea that I was no longer a person, but a caricature. What they didn't realize is that every performance reveals the audience too. Who laughed? Who stayed silent? Who pressed record? The video made the rounds, more than they expected. A few neighbors came by in the days after. Some looked sheepish. Some looked at me differently. Mrs. Evans brought cookies this time. Didn't say much. Just, I saw. That was enough. Peter didn't bring it up. Neither did Claire. But the boys grew quiet. Not with guilt, with awareness. Not shame, fear. One evening, Peter walked past the study and said, "Hey. About the barbecue." I didn't look up. He stood there in the doorway. Waiting. Hoping I'd make it easy for him. I didn't. After a pause, he sighed. Just, don't take it personally. They're kids. No, I said. They're not. And I closed the notebook before he could see the page. The attic key was cold in my hand. I hadn't held it in years. It was Linda's originally, brass, worn, with a tiny dent where it once dropped between the floorboards. We used to joke that the attic only opened for secrets. Now, it opened for decisions. I sat in the study that morning with sunlight spilling across the desk, the notebook closed beside me, and the key resting in my palm like a final question. The night before, I'd finished rewriting everything. The trust. The will. The accounts. Julia and I had combed through every clause, every name, every contingency. Peter. Claire. Michael. David. All removed. In their place, a scholarship fund. One that would support local children with medical needs, learning disabilities, or unstable homes, kids who needed what my family once received but had long since forgotten. It was Linda's idea, originally. Before she passed. She used to say, if we don't raise the kind, at least help the kind rise. The fund would be named after her. Not me. She deserved that. Leonard was now my healthcare proxy and executor. Julia had filed everything. Copies were in the bank vault. Passwords were secured. The locks were changed. My family didn't know. Not yet. But they would. Not through rage. Not through confrontation. But through absence. I walked to the attic stairs, slow, deliberate. My knees ached. My breath came short. But the key turned clean in the lock. The door creaked open. Up there, dust hung like fog. Old boxes. Yellowed books. My wedding suit. Linda's letters. Photo albums. I found the box labeled, Estate, Copy A. I pulled it down and opened it. Inside, the finalized version of my will, signed and witnessed, with Julia's card clipped to the front. Next to it, a single envelope addressed in my hand. To Peter, Claire, Michael, and David. Please read together. It didn't contain an apology. Or an explanation. Just one sentence. You mistook my silence for weakness, but it was the sound of the door I chose to open. I placed it in the center of the attic floor, under the beam of light from the small window. Not hidden. Not protected. Just visible. Then I walked downstairs. My knees popped. My hand grazed the railing, the wood smooth from years of use. I passed the kitchen, where Claire was on her phone. She didn't look up. I passed Peter's office, door closed, the faint hum of a Zoom call inside. Michael and David were in the living room again, arguing about a game controller. None of them noticed me. And that felt right. Because this time, I wasn't seeking to be seen. I stepped outside. The sun was soft. The breeze smelled like pine. Mrs. Evans waved from her porch. I raised a hand in return. Going somewhere, she called. Not far, I said. But somewhere better. She smiled, as if she already knew. Leonard was waiting in his car by the curb. He'd offered to take me to the lake house, the one Linda and I used to visit in the fall, where the leaves burned red and the water was always cold but clear. It wasn't luxurious. It was quiet. Clean. Mine. Everything set, he asked. I nodded. As we drove away, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care. But because I finally could. They found the attic envelope 2 days later. Peter tried to call. 6 times. Claire sent an email. We're confused. Please talk. Michael texted, so this is your big punishment? David didn't reach out at all. Julia forwarded me a copy of their formal objection paperwork. And then, a week later, their withdrawal after the no contest clause activated. Leonard handled the communication. I never had to speak to them again. The scholarship fund launched quietly. A press release. A local article. A photo of Linda in black and white, smiling beside a boy holding a violin he now owned because she made it possible. I cried for the first time in years that night. Not from pain. From presence. In the lake house, the mornings were slow. The air was sharp. I made my own breakfast, read again, wrote in a new notebook. Not to document pain. To record peace. And sometimes, when the fog lifted over the water and the geese moved across the sky like they always did in September, I'd whisper to myself. They wanted inheritance. But I gave them legacy. They just didn't know how to receive it. And that's not my burden anymore.